Okay, so today we're going to talk about how to make toolpaths in Mastercam, and I've drawn up some parts here. So this is sort of similar to what your first project will be. You'll have half a sheet of plywood to make something. Our plywood is 60 inches by 60 inches. So what I've drawn here is a 60-inch by 30-inch piece of plywood, and I've drawn all these parts inside of it. And this is really a good way to go to make sure your parts will fit inside your plywood, and you can arrange them so that you get the best use of material. So first of all, I need to tell the Mastercam what kind of machine I'm going to be using. So I'll come up here to Machine, Router, and I want to click on this one here, this THM MCAM. If it's not here, you can go to Manage List, and you should be able to find it here on the left, and then you click Add and OK, and then it should be there. So I'll come back to Router, and I'll click on that. You notice it puts this machine group here. It says a Thermwood 3-axis router, which is what we use in the Wood Research Lab. You only need to put this in once. If you put it in more than once, it can get a little confusing. So now I'm ready to do my tool paths. Generally what you want to do is, before you cut the outside of anything, you want to do any holes or notches inside your part first. So I'm going to drill holes at these X's here. So I'm going to come up to tool paths and do the 2D drill operation. I'll click on that, and now it says select basically where you want to drill your holes at. If I come to this point and click, you notice it changes color. I'm going to click on this one, click on that one. When I'm done, then I hit this check mark, and it comes up with a list of things I need to enter. So I'm going to come up with Tool, and I'll select Library Tool, and I'm going to use Tool 1, which is 3/8 diameter tool. I'll hit OK, and then really when you're drilling holes, all you need to do is figure out the tool and the linking parameters, which gives you your depth of cut. So I'm going to put here a -0.5. You guys probably on your first project will use a 1/2 inch plywood. I'm just going to call it a 1/2 inch thick. The plywood probably is like 0.45 or something, but for what I'm doing here, 0.5 will work just fine. I'll hit OK. Now you can see these yellow lines here on my screen. Those represent the movement of the drill bit in between drilling the holes. So that looks pretty good. It's given me this drill counterbore operation. So next I'm going to actually cut this hole here. Instead of drilling, I'm going to have to have the bit cut the hole. So that's a contour. So I'm going to hit contour, and there's different ways that you can pick geometry for contour. It usually defaults to this chain, and so we'll leave that on. If you wanted, you could use a window, put a window around something. If you're just doing a point, you could do that. If you're just doing a line, you can click this one. Okay, so we will click this. Notice that this arrow, that's showing the direction of the bit. So the bit right now is going to be going clockwise, and that is really not necessarily the direction that we want to cut. When we're cutting a hole inside a part, we want to generally go counterclockwise. That'll give you a little cleaner cut. So I'm going to click this button to reverse my arrow, and you also noticed it highlighted this whole thing. So I'm going to hit OK. That looks good, and we'll come up here to Tool. There again, I'm going to use the 3/8 tool, so I'll click on that. I'll come to Cut Parameters. This is where you tell it if you want the bit to cut on the left side of the arrow or the right side or on the arrow. So if you want to cut it on the line, you could turn computer off, and you notice that this changes here. But what we want to do is actually cut on the inside of our arrow, which would be on the left side. So that looks right there. We'll go to depth of cut. Generally, I say the maximum depth to cut, and that's what this is. Maximum depth to cut is the diameter of the bit. So we're using a 3/8 bit, so I'm going to change this to 0.375, and you notice I highlighted it here. I'll tab out of that, come in to lead in, lead out, and really we can turn this off most of the time. It's really rare that you really need that to be in there. If you notice, sometimes when the bit just dives in and start cutting, it may leave a little score mark or something, or may not cut totally clean. So in that case, you could turn this on, and the bit would basically ramp into the cut and ramp out when it's done, but I generally leave it off. And then these here we can all skip. We can come to linking parameters, which is the overall depth of cut, and you always have to put a negative number, so I'm going to put -0.5. Tab out, I'll say OK. So you noticed it put a blue line in this on the left side of, or in the center of the geometry line, and we want that blue line basically represents the center line of the router bit. So that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and cut the outside of all these parts now. So if we come up to toolpaths, those are contours, and I'll click on the two little parts first. So now we want this bit to be going, since we're cutting on the outside, we want it to be going clockwise, which this is clockwise, and we'll click on that one. We're going clockwise, so that's good there. I'll hit OK. Come up and find my tool. I'm going to use a 3/8 tool, cut parameters. Now the arrow's going the other direction. We do want to be on the left side, which will give us the outside of the bit. We'll come to depth of cut. It usually defaults to what we had done on our last operation. So you notice this is check mark, this is 0.375, so that's good. And now I'm going to actually go to tabs. So the two parts that I'm cutting right now are fairly small, and there is a chance that as it cuts these parts out, the parts could not have ample suction and be pulled to the table, and they might get a little bit loose. They can even get lifted up by the dust collector and sucked out. So we want to do tabs on smaller parts. Say any parts that are like a foot square would probably be good. So we're going to highlight tabs, and then we could do automatic is what I like to do. And right here this says create tabs on shapes less than 2 inches by 2 inches. Well, we want to really say tab all, and then we want our tabs to be, right now it defaults to this 0.75 width and 0.02 thickness. I think we want to go a little thicker than 0.02, so I'm going to change that to 0.04. And so that everything's good there. I'm going to come to linking parameters. It's defaulted to the -0.5. That sounds good to me. I'll hit OK. Now these two parts shows the blue line cutting around the outside. There's going to be tabs on them, although you can't tell from this view that there's tabs. Now I'm going to cut the other parts, which are bigger, so they won't need tabs. So I'll hit contour again, and I'll highlight all these parts. And now I'll hit OK. Come up here to tool. There again, I'm going to use the 3/8 tool. That's kind of our workhorse tool that we use for most cutting. So we'll use that a lot. Come up here to cut parameters. It's cutting on the left side, so that looks good. Depth cut, I like this. Tabs, we don't need tabs on these bigger parts. I'm going to highlight that. Linking parameters, it's -0.5 for our depth of cut, so that's good. I'll hit OK. So everything looks good here. It's cutting on the outside of all the parts. Say there was one part that the arrow wasn't going the right way and it's cutting on the inside. You could then come up to geometry and find your chain that's going the wrong way. So right here I clicked on chain 2, it highlights this one. And then if you right mouse button on top of chain 2, you can reverse the arrow. let's just try this and you can see what happens. So now our arrow is going counterclockwise. We'll hit OK. Now we've changed something kind of major in this operation here. So it gives us these X's. It needs to regenerate the toolpaths. So to do that, we can hit this red X up here, and now it's regenerated. And you can see now our cutting operation on this part is on the inside of the line. Well, that's probably not something we want, but I just wanted to show you how that works, that you can change things after the fact. You don't have to delete the operation and start all over again. So at this point, if I like everything, I could come up here and do a visualization or verify selected operations. But before I do that, you notice that these three are not check marked and this one is. I want to visualize the operations on all of these. So I'm going to hit this green triangle. Now they're all highlighted. I can hit this verify. And it's going to show me what it looks like when it's cutting the part on the computer. So this can help us before we actually use material to mess something up. This can show us mistakes on here. So I'm going to hit the play button, and you notice that it cut the parts. It cut them pretty quickly. You can't really tell what's going on too much. So I'm going to slow this down a little bit. I'll hit rewind. And the other thing is I really like to see in the isometric view. So I'll change that view. I feel like this shows you a little bit more information than the top view. I hit play. So it looks like it's cutting the parts okay, but there's some red lines on our screen, and the red lines are not a good sign. That's telling us that the bit is not lifting up enough and it's scoring across the material when it moves to the next part to cut. So we need to correct that. You can't see your tabs too well on this, but I'm going to right mouse button and I'm going to dynamically rotate. So with my left mouse I can move it around, and now since I've got it moved a little bit, whoop, there it goes. Try to stop. One more time. Dynamic rotation. Okay. So I don't know if you can see, but there's little tabs inside of here, and so that's going to help those parts to stay attached to the plywood. And then after everything's all done, you can just get a knife and cut those off. But I need to get rid of these red lines first before I do my G-code. So I'm going to come back, close that out, and come back here. I'm going to go back to top view, click on that. And so what's happening is that tool is just not lifting up enough, not retracting enough. So I'm going to come in here to my different operations, and so right here, this retract, I'm going to change this to 1 inch. Sometimes you won't get those red lines and everything will be good. You don't have to do this operation. Come up here to the next one. I'm going to change this to 1 inch. So that just kind of assures me that after it does the operation, it will lift up 1 inch to go to the next part to cut. So I'm going to change this one to 1. I'm just going to change all these operations to 1 inch, and then we'll see what it looks like. So change that to 1. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to highlight everything by hitting this green triangle. I'll come up here to verify selected and hit the play button, see what happens. Okay, it's drilling, it's cutting. You can kind of see the tabs right here too, can't you? So my red lines are no longer there, so that's good. So everything's done a good job. So I'm going to close this out. Couple things about my drawing I want to let you know too is my parts that I put inside my plywood, I've gotten them, they're not on the edge of the plywood. I've kind of moved them in and up a little bit. It's good to give yourselves a little bit of wiggle room when you're cutting your parts. If you put your part right on the edge, there's a chance that this line isn't going to cut properly. So make sure you move stuff inward a little bit. Okay, so now we're ready to do our G code. So to do that, you won't be able to do that at your home computer. You'll have to go to the computer lab in the Forest Products building and pull your drawing up in there and then run the G code. So I have the home version here too, so I can't do it, but in essence what you'll do is you'll hit this G1 and then that'll give you some different options, and I'll make another video for how to do the G code, and so be sure and check that one out. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps you out for making the toolpaths.